Marcus Thompson gripped his steering wheel tighter as he passed the old "Welcome to Millbrook" sign. The peeling paint and rusty edges reminded him that 15 years was a long time to be away from home. The summer heat made the road ahead look wavy, and his air conditioning struggled to keep up with the Alabama sun. His phone sat silent on the passenger seat, but he could still hear his secretary's voice from this morning. "Mr. Thompson, your aunt called again. She says your grandmother doesn't have much time left." Those words had been enough to make him cancel all his meetings and pack a quick bag. Now, 3 states later, here he was. The Chicago lawyer in him felt strange wearing just a plain blue t-shirt and jeans, but he knew better than to arrive in one of his expensive suits. Millbrook didn't take kindly to showing off, and Marcus had learned that lesson long before he left. As he drove down Oak Street, memories hit him like old photographs coming to life. There was Mrs. Johnson's house, where he used to get the best cookies after school. The porch was different now, but her rocking chair still sat there, empty and waiting. The Thompson boy, as everyone used to call him, was coming home a changed man. His grandmother's house appeared around the corner, and Marcus felt his heart skip. The white paint was grayer than he remembered, and the front garden his grandmother once kept perfect was now wild with weeds. The sight made his stomach twist with guilt. He should have come back sooner. Parking his rental car in the driveway, Marcus noticed the neighbors peeking through their curtains. News traveled fast in Millbrook, and by dinner time, everyone would know that Eleanor Thompson's grandson had finally returned. He could already imagine the whispers. That boy who made it big up north. The one whose parents disappeared. Eleanor's pride and joy who never visits. The front door creaked open before he could reach for it. Aunt Ruby stood there, looking older than he remembered, wearing the same disapproving expression she perfected years ago. "Took you long enough," she said, but pulled him into a hug anyway. "How is she?" Marcus asked, following his aunt into the house. The familiar smell of lemon polish and old wood wrapped around him like a forgotten blanket. "Sleeping now," Ruby answered, leading him through the living room where nothing had changed. The same photos lined the walls, his graduation picture, childhood snapshots, and that one mysterious photo of his parents that survived their disappearance. "She's been asking for you." Marcus paused at his grandmother's bedroom door, memories flooding back. This room had been his sanctuary when nightmares about his parents would wake him. Grandma Eleanor would always be there, ready with warm milk and stories about better days to come. Now, watching her small frame rise and fall with each breath, Marcus felt 7 years old again. The successful Chicago lawyer disappeared, replaced by the confused little boy who never understood why his parents left one ordinary Tuesday and never came back. "You should talk to her," Ruby said softly. "The doctor says she can still hear us." Marcus sat in the chair beside the bed, taking his grandmother's thin hand in his. Her skin felt like paper, so fragile he was afraid to hold too tight. The machines around her bed beeped steadily, marking time in this quiet room. "I'm here, Grandma," he whispered, his voice catching. "I'm sorry it took so long." Her eyes fluttered but didn't open. The window air conditioning unit hummed, mixing with the sounds of birds outside and distant lawnmowers. Life went on in Millbrook, even as time seemed to stand still in this room. Marcus settled into the chair, knowing he had a long wait ahead. Questions he buried years ago began surfacing in his mind. Why had his parents really left? Why did his grandmother always change the subject when he asked about them? What secrets lay hidden in this old house? As the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the room, Marcus Thompson, the boy who escaped Millbrook, realized some mysteries could only be solved by coming home. What he didn't know yet was that his grandmother's house held answers he might not be ready to face. 3 days passed in a blur of coffee cups and hospital chairs. Marcus spent his days sitting beside his grandmother's bed, watching her chest rise and fall while nurses came and went. The small hospital room became his whole world, its beeping machines marking time like strange clocks. On the fourth morning, something changed. Marcus had dozed off in the chair when a weak voice woke him. "My boy," Eleanor Thompson whispered, her eyes clear for the first time in days. "You came home?" Marcus jumped up, knocking over his cold coffee. "Grandma." "Yes, I'm here." He grabbed her hand, pressing the nurse's call button with his other hand. Her skin felt warmer than before, and her eyes followed his movements. "The nurses say you haven't left much," she said, managing a small smile. Still stubborn as ever. Learned from the best, Marcus replied, his throat tight. He wanted to ask her so many questions, but fear held him back. She looked so fragile lying there, her gray hair spread across the white pillow like a silver crown. Eleanor's grip on his hand suddenly tightened. Listen carefully, Marcus. There's not much time. Her voice grew stronger, urgent. In my house, the attic, behind the old trunk where we kept your winter clothes. Marcus leaned closer. What's in the attic, Grandma? A box. Your daddy's box. She closed her eyes for a moment, gathering strength. He was a good man, Marcus. A good man who made hard choices. Some people, they don't want the truth coming out, but it's time you knew. A nurse walked in, checking the machines, but Eleanor kept talking. The key. Inside my jewelry box. The little silver one. Her words came faster now, as if she was running out of time. Your parents, they didn't abandon you. They protected you. Protected all of us. Marcus felt his heart pounding. For 15 years, he believed his parents had simply walked away. Now his grandmother's words turned that truth upside down. Protected us from what? Grandma, please. From people who look like friends but carry darkness, she whispered. Your father found something. Something they wanted to keep buried. She started coughing, and the nurse moved forward with concern. Mrs. Thompson, you need to rest, the nurse said firmly, adjusting something on one of the machines. Eleanor's grip on Marcus's hand weakened. The box will tell you everything, but be careful who you trust. Even now, even after all these years. Even now what? Marcus asked, but her eyes were already closing. The nurse gently pushed him back, checking Eleanor's vital signs. She needs rest, the nurse said kindly. This is the most alert she's been in days. It's a good sign, but it takes a lot out of her. Marcus nodded, but his mind was racing. He watched his grandmother slip back into sleep, her words echoing in his head. A box in the attic. A silver key. His father's secrets. That evening, Aunt Ruby brought him a sandwich, finding him still in the same chair. You need to rest too, she said. Go home for a few hours. Take a shower. I'll stay with her. Marcus knew she was right. Plus, now he had a reason to visit the house. Call me if anything changes, he said, standing up slowly, his stiff muscles protesting. The drive to his grandmother's house felt different now. Every shadow seemed deeper, every passing car more suspicious. His grandmother's words had changed something fundamental about his world. Walking into the quiet house, Marcus looked up at the ceiling, knowing the attic waited above with its secrets. But first, he needed to find that silver key. He walked to his grandmother's room, where her jewelry box sat on the dresser, untouched for days. The box was old, carved wood that had belonged to his great-grandmother. Inside, among tangled necklaces and mismatched earrings, a small silver key glinted in the fading daylight. Marcus picked it up, feeling its weight in his palm. Standing there in his grandmother's room, holding a key to his family's secrets, Marcus Thompson realized he stood at a crossroads. Whatever waited in that box would change everything he thought he knew about his past. The question was he ready for the truth? Marcus stood at the attic door, silver key in hand, his heart beating faster than he wanted to admit. The old wooden stairs creaked under his feet as he climbed up, using his phone's flashlight to guide the way. Dust particles danced in the beam of light, making the air look thick and mysterious. The attic smelled like old books and forgotten memories. Marcus remembered playing up here as a child, making forts out of old blankets while summer storms rattled the windows. Now, as a grown man, the space felt smaller but somehow more threatening. He found the winter clothes trunk exactly where his grandmother said it would be. It sat against the back wall, its brass latches dulled with age. Marcus moved it carefully, trying not to make too much noise even though he was alone in the house. Behind where the trunk had been, he noticed something odd about the floorboards. One board looked slightly different from the others. Marcus ran his fingers along its edge and felt a small gap. His hands were shaking as he worked his fingers into the space and lifted. The board came up easily, as if it had been moved many times before. There, in the dark space beneath the floor, sat a metal box about the size of a shoebox. It was covered in dust, but otherwise looked well preserved. The keyhole gleamed dully in his flashlight beam. Marcus sat cross-legged on the attic floor and placed the box in front of him. The silver key slid in perfectly. With a deep breath, he turned it, hearing the soft click of the lock opening. Inside, the box was packed with papers, photographs, and what looked like old letters. The first thing he pulled out was a stack of newspaper clippings, yellowed with age. The headlines made his blood run cold. Local civil rights evidence goes missing. County records mysteriously destroyed. FBI investigates missing documents. The dates on the newspapers were from 1989, the year before his parents disappeared. Marcus spread the clippings out on the floor, reading quickly. They told a story of missing evidence from old civil rights cases, important documents that had vanished from the courthouse. Beneath the newspapers, he found photographs. His father appeared in several of them, standing with men in suits Marcus didn't recognize. On the back of one photo, someone had written, "Meeting with Agent Wilson, trust no one else." His hands froze when he pulled out an official-looking document with an FBI letterhead. At the bottom was his father's signature, clear and bold. The document was dated just 3 weeks before his parents vanished. "What were you involved in, Dad?" Marcus whispered to the empty attic. A sudden noise from downstairs made him jump. Marcus held his breath, listening. It was probably just the old house settling, but his grandmother's warning about being careful rang in his ears. He quickly took photos of everything with his phone before carefully returning the items to the box. Just as he was about to close it, he noticed something else at the bottom. A small envelope with his name on it, in his father's handwriting. Marcus's hands trembled as he opened it. Inside was a single piece of paper with just a few lines. "Son, if you're reading this, it means you're old enough to understand. What we did to protect the truth. Some truths are worth any sacrifice. There's more you need to know, but not here. Find James Wilson at the old Miller's Creek Bridge. Show him the photo of us together. He'll know." The sound of a car door slamming outside snapped Marcus back to the present. He quickly returned the box to its hiding place and replaced the floorboard. Through the small attic window, he saw a black SUV parked across the street. A man in a dark suit stepped out, looking up at the house. Marcus's heart raced as he remembered his grandmother's words about people who looked like friends but carried darkness. He turned off his flashlight and sat perfectly still in the dark attic, listening to footsteps on the front porch below. The mystery of his parents' disappearance was starting to unravel, but with each answer came new questions. And now, it seemed, new dangers. Marcus spent the next hour crouched in the dark attic, barely breathing, until the man in the black suit finally left. Through the dusty window, he watched the SUV drive away, its tinted windows reflecting the afternoon sun. Only then did he dare to move. Coming down the attic stairs, his mind raced with questions. Who was watching the house? How did they know he found something? He needed answers, but his grandmother's warning about trust echoed in his head. The next morning, Marcus walked into the Millbrook County Courthouse wearing one of his Chicago lawyer suits. The familiar weight of his briefcase helped him feel more in control. The courthouse hadn't changed much. Same marble floors, same wooden benches, same smell of old paper and furniture polish. "I'd like to see some case files from 1989, he told the clerk, trying to sound casual. Civil rights cases specifically. The elderly clerk looked up from her computer, her glasses hanging from a chain around her neck. "Those would be in the basement archives," she said. "But you'll need special permission for civil rights era documents." "I'm a lawyer." Marcus showed her his credentials. "And these cases might relate to my father's work. James Thompson. He practiced here." The clerk's face changed at his father's name. "Oh, I remember James," she said, her voice dropping to almost a whisper. "Such a shame what happened." She glanced around nervously. "The basement archives are closed for renovation. Have been for months. Maybe try the library." Marcus noticed her hands shaking slightly as she spoke. She was lying, but why? At the local diner for lunch, Marcus sat in a corner booth, watching the door. His father's note mentioned Miller's Creek Bridge and someone named James Wilson, but he needed more information before heading out there. An old man at the counter kept looking his way. Finally, the man picked up his coffee cup and walked over. Without asking, he sat down across from Marcus. "You look just like your daddy," the old man said quietly. "Same way of holding your shoulders when you're worried." He sipped his coffee. "Name's Bill. Used to work maintenance at the courthouse." Marcus studied him carefully. "You knew my father?" "Knew him well enough to say you should stop asking questions at the courthouse." Bill's voice was friendly, but his eyes were serious. "Some doors better stay closed, son. Some sleeping dogs better lie. Before Marcus could respond, Bill stood up. Your daddy was a good man. That's all anyone needs to know. He walked out, leaving his coffee half finished. Later that afternoon, Marcus noticed the black SUV again, following him as he drove through town. He took random turns down side streets, finally losing it near the old cotton mill. His phone rang. It was Aunt Ruby at the hospital. Your grandmother's asking for you, she said. She's awake again. At the hospital, Eleanor was sitting up in bed, looking stronger than before. But her eyes were filled with worry when Marcus walked in. They came to the house, didn't they? She asked before he could speak. Dark suit, black car? Marcus sat down heavily. How did you know? Because they've been watching, she said. All these years. Waiting to see if we knew where your parents hid the evidence. She reached for his hand. Did you find the box? Yes, Marcus answered. But I don't understand. What evidence? Who are these people? Eleanor's grip tightened. Some of the most powerful families in this county got their power through evil means, Marcus. Your father found proof. Documents about land stolen from black families, evidence about unsolved murders, names of people who covered it all up. She coughed, and Marcus helped her sip some water. Those families, she continued, they still run things here. Their children, their grandchildren, they'll do anything to keep the truth buried. A nurse walked in to check Eleanor's vitals. Marcus saw his grandmother's eyes drift to the door, suddenly cautious. Even here, they couldn't be sure who might be listening. Find James Wilson, she whispered as the nurse worked. But be careful. The bridge at night. No phones. They're always watching. Marcus left the hospital with his heart pounding. The pieces were starting to fit together, but the picture they formed was darker than he'd imagined. As he walked to his car, he noticed a new black SUV in the parking lot, its engine running. The game of cat and mouse had begun. That night, Marcus drove to Miller's Creek Bridge with his heart in his throat. The old wooden bridge stood like a skeleton in the moonlight, its weathered planks stretching across the dark water below. He parked his car hidden among the trees, just as his grandmother had suggested. At exactly midnight, another car appeared, driving slowly with its lights off. An elderly white man stepped out, his hair silver in the moonlight. He walked to the middle of the bridge and waited. Marcus took a deep breath, grabbed the photo from the box, and got out of his car. His footsteps echoed on the old wood as he approached the man. James Wilson? Marcus asked quietly. The man nodded. You look so much like your father. His voice was rough with age. Show me the photo. Marcus handed him the picture, the one of his father with the FBI agents. Wilson studied it under a small flashlight, then nodded again. I was your father's FBI handler, Wilson said, handing the photo back. We worked together for 2 years before everything went wrong. He was the bravest man I ever knew. They walked to the edge of the bridge, both men watching the water below. Wilson spoke quietly, his words carrying the weight of long-buried secrets. Your father was a local lawyer who noticed something strange, Wilson explained. Black families who'd owned land for generations suddenly losing their properties. Documents disappearing from the courthouse. Death certificates that didn't match witness accounts from the civil rights era. Marcus listened intently as Wilson continued. The FBI had been trying to solve old civil rights cases, but someone was destroying evidence. Your father volunteered to help us investigate from the inside. He discovered that 3 powerful families, the Richardsons, the Hunters, and the Caldwells, had built their fortunes by stealing land from black families during the civil rights movement. Those families still run the county, Marcus said, remembering his grandmother's words. Yes, Wilson nodded. Your father found proof, deeds, letters, photographs, even confessions. Evidence that showed how they forged documents, threatened people, and sometimes worse. But before we could move on it, they discovered he was working with us. A car passed on the distant highway, making both men fall silent until its lights faded. The night your parents disappeared, Wilson said, they didn't run away. We moved them into witness protection. The evidence they gathered was so damaging, these families would have killed them to keep it quiet. Marcus felt his world shifting. Why couldn't they take me? Moving a child would have drawn attention. Your grandmother agreed to keep you safe, to let everyone think your parents had abandoned you. It protected you and kept the families from looking too closely at what your parents had found. Wilson reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope. Your father left this with me. Said to give it to you if you ever came asking questions. It's a copy of everything he found, digitized and stored on this flash drive. The originals are in a safe place. Marcus took the envelope with trembling hands. Why now? Why did Grandma wait until she was sick to tell me? Because the statute of limitations on some of these crimes is about to expire, Wilson explained. And because the Caldwell boy is running for state office. If people knew his family's wealth came from stealing land from black families, if they knew about the murders his grandfather covered up. A twig snapped in the darkness. Both men turned quickly. You need to go, Wilson said urgently. They're still watching. Always watching. Take that envelope to Angela Martinez at the Birmingham FBI office. She's expecting you. Can I see my parents? Marcus asked quickly. Once this evidence goes public, they can come home, Wilson said. But until then, you need to be careful. These families have a lot to lose. Marcus hurried back to his car, the envelope clutched tightly in his hand. As he drove away, he saw headlights flick on behind the bridge. The black SUV was back. In his rearview mirror, he watched Wilson disappear into the night. The old FBI agent had given him the missing pieces of the puzzle, but now Marcus had an even bigger decision to make. The truth about his parents could finally come out. That truth might shake the foundations of Millbrook's most powerful families. And people with power, as his father had discovered, would do anything to keep it. Marcus drove fast through the dark country roads, his hands tight on the steering wheel. The black SUV stayed close behind him, its headlights filling his rearview mirror. The envelope from Wilson felt heavy in his jacket pocket, its contents worth more than gold to the people chasing him. His grandmother's warning ran through his head. They're always watching. Now he knew who they were. The children and grandchildren of Millbrook's corrupt families, desperate to keep their dark secrets buried. His phone rang. It was Aunt Ruby. Marcus, thank God you answered. Her voice shook. 2 men came to the hospital. They were asking questions about you, about the house. Then your grandmother. She paused, catching her breath. She had another episode. The doctors are with her now. I'm coming, Marcus said, but then remembered Wilson's warning about the FBI agent in Birmingham. The evidence had to get out, or all of this would be for nothing. Making a split-second decision, Marcus turned onto Highway 65, away from the hospital. Birmingham was an hour away. He just had to lose the SUV first. Rain started falling, heavy drops hitting his windshield. Marcus knew these roads from his childhood. Every curve, every back road. The SUV behind him was driven by someone who didn't. He turned suddenly onto Old Mill Road, a narrow path that twisted through dense woods. The SUV's tires squealed as it tried to follow. Marcus pushed his car faster, taking the curves from memory while the rain made everything a blur. His phone rang again, unknown number. Mr. Thompson, a smooth voice said when he answered, "This is David Caldwell. I believe you have something that belongs to my family." Marcus's blood ran cold. David Caldwell, the man running for state office, whose grandfather had stolen land and covered up murders. Those documents are quite old, Caldwell continued. Probably not even accurate. Why don't we meet and discuss this like reasonable men? I can make it worth your while. Like you made it worth it for other families? Marcus asked. The ones whose land you stole? That's ancient history. Caldwell's voice hardened. Think about your grandmother, Mr. Thompson. She's not well. It would be a shame if the stress of all this caused her condition to worsen. Marcus ended the call, his hands shaking with anger. Up ahead, he saw his chance, the old railroad crossing. He knew something about it that his pursuers didn't. He turned off his headlights and took a sharp right just before the crossing, onto a narrow dirt road hidden by overgrown bushes. The SUV roared past in the darkness, missing the turn. Marcus drove slowly now, his car bumping along the old logging road. His father used to bring him hunting here. The road led to an abandoned barn where they could hide until morning. Inside the barn, Marcus used his phone's flashlight to examine the flash drive from Wilson. There were hundreds of files, land deeds showing property stolen from black families, falsified death certificates, photos of secret meetings, and signed confessions from people long dead. His phone lit up with a text from Aunt Ruby. Grandmother stable now, but those men are still here. Be careful. Another text followed, this one from an unknown number. The Caldwells aren't the only ones with something to lose. Last chance to make a deal. Marcus thought about his parents, living in hiding for 15 years. He thought about his grandmother, keeping this secret to protect him. He thought about all the families who had lost their land, their history, their justice. Opening his phone's browser, he began uploading copies of the files to multiple secure locations. If anything happened to him, the truth would still come out. As dawn broke, Marcus started his car again. The Birmingham FBI office would be opening soon. Agent Martinez would be waiting with a team to protect him and process the evidence. But first, he needed to make one stop. His grandmother had carried this burden alone for 15 years. He wouldn't let her face these people without him anymore. Marcus pulled out onto the main road, watching for black SUVs. The truth about Millbrook's powerful families was about to come out, and there was no turning back now. The morning sun was rising over Millbrook County Hospital when Marcus walked through the front doors. He backed up all the files, sent copies to 3 different news organizations, and called Agent Martinez. Now it was time to protect his grandmother. 2 large men in dark suits stood outside Eleanor Thompson's room. They straightened when they saw Marcus approaching, their hands moving toward their jackets. "Gentlemen," Marcus said loudly, pulling out his phone. "I'm live streaming this to my law office in Chicago. Any sudden moves might look bad on camera." The men exchanged glances, then stepped aside. Inside the room, Marcus found David Caldwell sitting next to his grandmother's bed. Aunt Ruby stood in the corner, her face tight with worry. "Mr. Thompson," Caldwell smiled, standing smoothly. "I'm glad you came. We were just having a pleasant chat with your grandmother about the old days." Eleanor's eyes met Marcus's, and he saw the fear behind them, but he also saw something else: pride. "The evidence is already out," Marcus said calmly. "I sent copies to the FBI, newspapers, and TV stations. In about," he checked his watch, 30 minutes, Agent Martinez's team will arrive from Birmingham. It's over, Mr. Caldwell." Caldwell's smile disappeared. "You have no idea what you've done. This isn't just about my family. Half the businesses in this county were built with that land. The people who work there, their families. You'll destroy everything." "You mean like your grandfather destroyed those families he stole from?" Marcus moved closer to his grandmother's bed. "Or the lives he ruined with those covered-up murders?" "Those people were troublemakers." Caldwell's voice turned cold. "They didn't know how to manage land properly. My grandfather did this county a favor." Eleanor Thompson sat up straighter in her bed. "James Thompson's son knows exactly what your grandfather did," she said clearly. "And now everyone else will too." Suddenly, commotion erupted in the hallway. Agent Martinez arrived early, leading a team of FBI agents. They quickly took control of the room, escorting Caldwell and his men out. "Your father would be proud," Martinez told Marcus as her team secured the area. "We've been building a case against the Caldwells for years, but we never had enough evidence. What you found connects everything." Marcus's phone buzzed with news alerts. The story was breaking. Land theft and murder. Millbrook's dark secret exposed. FBI investigates prominent families in civil rights cold cases. State office candidate linked to historical crimes. More FBI agents arrived, bringing surprising news. The Hunters and the Richardsons, the other 2 families involved, were already cooperating, turning on the Caldwells to save themselves. "There's something else," Martinez said, smiling. "We've arranged a secure call. Someone wants to talk to you." She handed Marcus a special phone. When he answered, a familiar voice spoke, one he hadn't heard in 15 years. "Son?" His father's voice cracked with emotion. "Your mother and we've waited so long for this day." Marcus couldn't speak for a moment. His grandmother reached for his hand, tears in her eyes. "We wanted to tell you so many times," his father continued. "But as long as those families had power, you wouldn't have been safe knowing the truth." "When can I see you?" Marcus finally managed to ask. "Soon," his father promised. "The Witness Protection Program is already working on our release papers. Maybe a week, maybe less." Eleanor Thompson was crying openly now. "James, is Mary there too?" Marcus held the phone where his grandmother could hear. His mother's voice joined the call, and for the first time in 15 years, the Thompson family was together, even if only by phone. Outside the hospital room, Agent Martinez coordinated with her team. The Caldwell estate was being searched. Records were being seized. Long-buried truths were finally coming to light. Marcus looked out the window at the town below. Millbrook would never be the same after today. Some people would lose their power, others would get justice, and many would have to face hard truths about their family histories. But for Marcus Thompson, watching his grandmother smile as she talked to her long-lost son and daughter-in-law, everything finally made sense. The pieces of his broken childhood were coming back together, stronger for having been broken. The truth had finally won. 1 month later, Marcus stood in Millbrook's small airport, his heart beating so fast he could barely stand still. Beside him, his grandmother sat in a wheelchair, looking stronger than she had in weeks. Aunt Ruby paced nervously, checking her watch every few minutes. The small private plane had just landed. FBI agents scanned the area while Agent Martinez stood nearby, smiling at Marcus's obvious excitement. This was the day witness protection had cleared his parents to come home. The plane's door opened. Marcus held his breath. A woman appeared first. His mother, Mary Thompson. Her hair had gone gray, but her smile was exactly as he remembered it. Behind her came his father, James Thompson, older but still standing tall and proud. For a moment, everyone froze. 15 years of separation stretched between them like a gulf. Then Marcus's mother broke into a run, and suddenly he was wrapped in her arms, his father joining the embrace. They held each other, crying and laughing at the same time. "My baby," Mary whispered, touching Marcus's face. "Look how handsome you've grown." "Son," James's voice was rough with emotion. "We've missed so much." Eleanor Thompson's soft sob drew their attention. James knelt beside his mother's wheelchair, taking her hands in his. "Mama, thank you. Thank you for protecting our boy." The reunion moved to Eleanor's house, now cleared of any surveillance. As they sat in the living room, years of secrets and separation began to heal. Marcus learned about his parents' life in witness protection, how they'd lived in Seattle under different names, how they watched his law career from afar through news articles, how they'd never stopped hoping for this day. "We saw you graduate law school," Mary said proudly, from a distance, in disguise. "We couldn't stay away." "And we read about every case you won in Chicago," James added. "Following in your old man's footsteps after all." The doorbell rang. Agent Martinez entered with important news. The case was growing bigger than anyone expected. Other counties were reporting similar land theft cases. The FBI was opening a special task force, and they wanted James Thompson's help as a consultant. "Your father's evidence didn't just expose Millbrook's secrets," Martinez explained. "It's helping families across the South reclaim stolen property. People are finally getting justice." More visitors arrived. Bill from the diner, who turned out to be a retired FBI informant, and James Wilson, who'd helped protect the family all these years. Even some of the families who'd lost their land came to welcome James Thompson home and thank Marcus for his courage. Later that evening, as the sun set over Millbrook, the Thompson family sat on the porch together. The old swing creaked gently as Marcus's parents held hands, making up for 15 years of missed moments. "What happens now?" Marcus asked. "Will you stay in Millbrook?" His father looked out at the town he'd risked everything to protect. "This is home. It always was. The Caldwells, the Hunters, the Richardsons, they thought they owned this town. But Millbrook belongs to all of us. Always did." "Your father's right," Mary added, "and now that the truth is out, we can help make things right. There's still work to do." Eleanor Thompson, looking stronger every day, smiled at her family. "And this time, we'll do it together." Marcus thought about his life in Chicago, his law practice, his plans. Everything had changed in just a few weeks. But watching his parents together, seeing his grandmother's joy, he knew what he had to do. "I'm opening a branch office here," he announced, "to help families reclaim their land, get their stories heard." His father's eyes filled with pride, like father, like son. As night fell over Millbrook, the Thompson family stayed together on that porch, making plans, sharing stories, healing old wounds. The truth had cost them 15 years, but it had given them something precious in return, a chance to be whole again. In the distance, the old "Welcome to Millbrook" sign still stood, but now it meant something different. It wasn't just a sign anymore, it was a promise that justice, no matter how long delayed, would finally prevail. and the Thompson family would be there to see it through, together at last.